Hello guys, welcome back. Today we are going to start a new short story for ninth ICSE syllabus, A Face in the Dark, written by Ruskin Bond. It is a wonderful short story which carries fear, mystery, suspense, thrilling, and everything it contains in the short story. So before we could go in detail of the short story, I want you to know about the author, Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond is an Indian author of British descent. He is considered to be an icon among Indian writers and children's author and a top novelist. He wrote his first novel, The Room on the Roof, when he was 17. Since then, he has written several novels, over 500 short stories, as well as various essays and poems, all of which have established him as one of the best loved and most admired contemporary Indian writers. In 1992, he received the Sahitya Academy Award for English writing for his short stories collection called Our Trees Still Grow in Dera. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 1999 for contributions to children's literature. He now lives with his adopted family in Landor near Missouri. Now, now before going, I want you to listen to the short story very carefully and we will go through it in detail, line by line explanation. Now, A Face in the Dark, written by Ruskin Bond. Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to school late one night on the outskirts of the hill station of Shimla. Now, Mr. Oliver is an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to school late at one particular night. The school is actually situated in the outskirts, means far from city. Now, where in the hill station of Shimla. Now, where it is? Now, in the hill stations of Shimla, guys. Now, from before Kipling's time, the school had been run on English public school lines, and the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, who wore blazers, caps, and ties. See now during, that means, I'm not talking about during here. See, from before Kipling's time, that means before the birth of Rudyard Kipling. Now, who is Rudyard Kipling? Now, Rudyard Kipling is one of the most famous author. Okay, you can remember him if you have read The Jungle Book, or if you have seen the movie called Jungle Book. It has been adapted from Rudyard Kipling's novel called The Jungle Book. Okay, he's famous for his Jungle Book novel. Okay, before the birth of Rudyard Kipling, the school had been run on English public school lines. So on an English medium, and what it has been called as English public school lines. Okay, and the boys who are in that particular school are from wealthy family, or you can also say that aristocratic family. Okay, they wore blazers. Blazers means suit. Okay, caps and ties. Okay, see, Life magazine in a future on India had once called it the Eden of the East. Mr. Oliver had been teaching in the school for several years. Now, in a Life magazine, so when they were trying to future about India, so when they were describing about India, so in India, about an article about India, in India, this school was actually being described. Okay, and when the school was being described, they compared it as calling it as Eden of the East. Now, as India is in the East, so they called this school as the Eden of the East. Why? Now, see, Eden of the East, why? Because, see, Eden of the East is one of the most famous college in Eden. Now, let me tell you where is this Eden. Now, you can see on the screen, the Eton of the East. Now, let me tell you. See, Eton College, which is in Eton, is in south central England. It was established in 1440 and enjoyed a great status. People who studied there are not from a small family, they're all from a wealthy family. Okay, especially in England, I'm talking about. And they are from all aristocratic family. And people who studied had a very high status there. It was founded by King Henry IV. Now, as this Eton in the west, the Eton College in the west, which is situated in Eton, similarly, the school where Mr. Oliver has been working for several years is being called as Eton of the East. Okay, and it has been described in a magazine. It was considered to be called as one of the most famous magazine called Life magazine. What is the name of the magazine? Called Life magazine. Okay, guys. Now let's come back. Now, the Shimla Bazaar, with its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school. And Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, returning after dark, when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. Now, Shimla Bazaars are actually very famous. It is famous for its cinemas and restaurant. Okay. Since it is 3 miles away from school. How many miles? 3 miles away from school. And Mr. Oliver is a bachelor. Okay. Usually as a bachelor, he would like to go watch some cinemas, go eat something, something or the other he would do. Okay. So that is how he could pass the time. Okay. So he would go in the evening in the town, enjoy something, watch something, or see something, or have some good food, and return back to school in the dark. And he usually would take the path, the shortcut, that is the pine forest. What he would do? He would usually take the shortcut in the pine forest. Okay, let's come back. That too in the dark time. Okay, remember that. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees made sad, eerie sound and kept most people to the main road. So now, when there was a strong wind gushing, the wind gushing, so the pine trees would make a very sad and a very sad tone. It would make a very high wind gushing sound. Okay, and most of the people would get scared. Okay, and when people would get scared, people would not like to travel in the shortcut. And most people, what people would prefer? They would prefer the main road. Okay, but Mr. Oliver was not a nervous and imaginative man. See, whereas Mr. Oliver was not a nervous person. Nervous means he was not scared, he was not frightened. Okay, he was not a kind of a fellow, and he was not a person imaginating things like that and like that. Okay, he would never imagine all those kind of things. Okay, he carried a torch. Okay, he would always carry a torch and its gleam. The batteries were running down, moved fitfully down the narrow forest path. So what happened is that at this point of time, he carried a torch with him. It was gleaming, but this time the torch was running down. That means the batteries were running down. That means the batteries were low. Okay. This time he was moving little fitful, means he was little moving fast into the narrow forest path. So he was moving very fast in the narrow forest path. Okay. So this time the light, okay, let us see what happened. When its flickering light fell in the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock, Mr. Oliver stopped. Boys were not supposed to be out after dark. Now, suddenly the flickering light, okay, suddenly the flickering light fell on a boy who was sitting alone there. He was sitting alone there on a rock. Suddenly, Mr. Oliver stopped. He stopped. And you remember, and usually you all know that, if it is a residential school or if it's a boarding school, boys are not supposed to be out after dark. They are not supposed to be out after dark, guys. Okay, guys. Let us see what happens. "What are you doing out here, boy?" asked Mr. Oliver, sharply moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. Suddenly, Mr. Oliver asked him, "What are you doing here, boy?" he asked him. Okay. He moved a little closer and he wanted to recognize who is this naughty fellow, who is this miscreant, who is this boy who's undisciplined. Okay. But even as he approached the boy, the Oliver sensed that something was wrong. The boy appeared to be crying. Okay, what happened is that suddenly, as he was approaching near to the boy, Mr. Oliver could sense something is wrong. Something strange is happening over here. He could sense that the boy was actually crying. He could sense that the boy was actually crying. Okay. His head hung down. He held his face in his hands and his body shook convulsively. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctively uneasy. So what happened is that the boy, as he was appeared to be crying, he hung his head down. That means he hung his head down, okay, and he held his hands on his face, okay, on his face, okay. His body was shaking. That means he was shaking, okay. It was shaking him. Like as you keep crying, how you shake your body. It was a strange. It seemed something very strange, but it was a soundless cry. There was no sound at all. His body was just shaking. There was no sound at all of weeping. His body was just shaking. Okay. Mr. Oliver, at this point of time, he was really feeling uneasy. He was really feeling uneasy right now. Let us go, guys. Let us go deeper right now. Let us see what happens. "Well, what's the matter?" he asked, his anger giving way to concern. So what happened is that, well, what's the matter? Right now, his anger changed into like a concern. "What are you crying for?" he asked the boy. "What are you crying for?" The boy would not answer or look up. So the boy didn't even look him up. He didn't even answer at all. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. "Come on, boy. You shouldn't be out here at this hour. Tell me the trouble. Look up." The boy looked up. So what happened is that, as he said, "What is the matter?" And he said, listen to me very carefully, okay. As he said, "For what is the reason that you're crying for, boy?" The boy didn't answer, first of all, and he didn't look up. The body was continuing, okay, it was continuing. It continued shaking and sobbing. Sobbing means like when you keep crying, you sob, you keep sobbing, okay. "Come on, boy," he said, "you shouldn't be here at this point of time, at this hour. You shouldn't be here. Tell me, what is the trouble? Tell me, what is that troubling you? Tell me." He said the boy. He said the boy to look up. The boy suddenly looked up. Okay. And he took out his hands from his face and looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face, if you could call it a face. Suddenly the boy removed his hands out of his face, and suddenly the torch fell on the boy's face. Suddenly, Mr. Oliver could see, and he couldn't imagine, and he couldn't think also. And the narrator says that, can you call it a face? It was not a face at all. What happened? Let us see. Okay. It had no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it. And that's where the story should end. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end here. So what happened? As soon as the torch fell on the boy's face, the boy removed his hands, okay, to show his face so that his teacher could look into it. As the torch fell on the boy's face, The boy, usually, it was not a face at all. Why? Because it had no eyes, it had no ears, it had no nose, and it had no mouth also. It was just nothing but a round, smooth head. Okay. The boy was wearing a school cap on top of it. Okay. And that's where we should think that the story should end. But Mr. Oliver did not end here. The torch fell from his trembling hand. He turned and scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. He was still running towards the school building when he saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman, gasping for breath. "What is it, Sahib?" asked the watchman. "Has there been an accident? Why are you running?" Suddenly, what happened is that Mr. Oliver, as soon as he saw the boy's face, the torch from his hand fell from his shivering hand, trembling or shivering hand. He turned and he could run as fast as he could. Onto the path, he ran blindly. He couldn't see anything, whatever could come on his way. Even the trees' branches were hitting him, or even he was screaming aloud. And he was screaming aloud for help, calling out for help. As he was running towards, as he came near towards the school building, he could see that he was very near to the school building. He was very near. Suddenly he saw a lantern swinging in middle of his path. Mr. Oliver stumbled and fell over the watchman. In a gasping breath, in a gasping breath, okay. And the watchman asked, "What is it, Sahib? What is it? What happened? Has there been any accident? Why are you running? What happened? Tell me, Sahib." Sahib, watchman, usually they call to them. Usually Anglo-Indians were being called as Sahib at that times, at those days. Okay, so the watchman asked, "What is it, Sahib? What is it? Have you met an accident? What happened? Why are you running?" Suddenly, with that gasping breath, at that point of time, you can't speak aloud, okay? You are breathing heavily and you're trying to reply. "I saw something horrible. A boy weeping in the forest. He had no face," he said. Mr. Oliver replied, "I saw something horrible," he said. "The boy was weeping, he was crying, okay, in the forest, okay, and he had no face." "No face, Sahib?" Watchman said. "No face, Sahib? No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing." Mr. Oliver replied, "No eyes, okay, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing at all." "Do you mean was it like this, Sahib?" asked the watchman, and raised the lamp to his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow. And that's when the wind blew and the lamp out. So what happens? Slowly, the watchman took the lantern near his face and he said, "Was it like this, Sahib?" As he raised the lamp near his face, near his own face, Mr. Oliver could see the watchman's face. It also had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even eyebrows. And that's where the wind blew off. That means the lamp was blown out. And that's the end of Mr. Oliver. It is you, students, have to decide whether Mr. Oliver has been dead or has been living. It is your fate. It is you can choose the fate of Mr. Oliver. Okay, guys? So I hope that you all enjoyed A Face in the Dark, written by Ruskin Bond. Take care. Have a good time.